Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our weekend edition of Hebrew Word Study. And we are in 2 Samuel chapter 5 and going through, starting and picking up, I guess, with verse 6. And of course, we're alternating every other week. Last week you had the Matthew Hebrew edition, and I hope you're enjoying that. And but for those of you who may prefer to stay in the Hebrew of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, we're in 2 Samuel. So continuing there. So this is a very interesting passage. David again has been um, brought to the kingdom. He has been accepted by everyone, but there's still many rough spots. And today you're going to see one of those. So we're picking up at verse 6, and it talks about Vayelech HaMelech Va'anasha Yerushalayim. So just saying the Hebrew for you, just so you can get a little bit of understanding that, like the word Jerusalem, in Hebrew there is no J, so they have a Y sound, so it's Yerushalayim. And then they're talking about this group of people that in English it's Jebusite, but again, there's no J in Hebrew, so it's Hayasvushi. So Hayavusi is the name. And so you see that the translators take some liberties trying to create a name that makes sense, or I should say, can sound properly and be pronounced properly by English speakers, because Hebrew has some very difficult and challenging pronunciations, and it takes a while to learn how to pronounce it. And so translators do that to make it easier for you. So what's happening here is David and his men come against Jerusalem. Now, obviously, Jerusalem is the center of everything nowadays. You know, it's the center of all Judaism. It's the center of Christianity. It's the center of the Muslim religion. And I believe there are even a couple others that call Jerusalem their center. And so in Judges verse 6, we see that it records um, that they tried to come against Jerusalem and were not able to conquer it because of the Jebusites that were there. And why did the Jebusites cause so much? Why were they so difficult, and why was it so challenging? And you'll find that they were quite arrogant. And of course, they spoke here to David, Vayomer le David lemor lo tavo Hena, you shall not, saying to David, you shall not come here. And then they make a phrase here that sounds so strange to us. In English, it says, but the blind and the lame you can't come in because, and again, different versions give you different translations. One of them said that because David didn't like the lame and the blind people, that he can't come there. It's very challenging, and you'll find if you look through different translations that it um, is challenging to identify. That's because Hebrew tells us that this is a kind of a metaphor or a taunt of using cliches to impress upon us. So what they're really saying here is that, David, you're so weak that if we and our fortress is so strong, is really what they were saying, that the city of Jerusalem was very well fortified. And they're saying that their fortress is so impenetrable that even if we got rid of all of our soldiers and staffed it with blind people and lame people, you can't even come in. You couldn't even get in if we weren't here. You just couldn't fight your way out of a wet paper bag. That type of metaphor and cliche that we use to describe and to somewhat humiliate someone by making them feel inferior, making them feel that they just couldn't measure up. And so this is the type of statement here saying, David, even if we fortified this place with blind people and lame people, you still couldn't get in, because they trusted in their fortifications. Jerusalem sits on a hill, is pretty well surrounded, except there's just one side that's somewhat vulnerable. And you'll see later on when we look at some in the book of Kings, you'll see they fortified that. But regardless, David verse 7 says that he took it. And we'll find out a little bit later how he did, but what's also very interesting in verse 7 is that you'll see the word Zion, which again in Hebrew it's Zion, is how it's pronounced. And this is the very first time that this word is ever used in the Bible, until we get to 2 Samuel here. And what's interesting is no one really knows what it means. No one has a very good translation of Sion. If we click on this in our Hebrew concordance, it says that it's a mountain. And it says it comes from the root word of siyah, and you look up siyah and it says dryness and drought. Well, dryness and drought certainly would not be a very appropriate um, correlation or reference for the city of God. So we nobody really knows what Zion means and where it came from, but this is where it's used for the first time, and so it's very quite interesting. So Zion he David, Zion, the city of David. And it said on verse 8 that David um, put a challenge out to his men that whosoever defeats the Jebusite, and here is the clue on how they defeated them. It says that they climbed up, and this word in some translations you'll find that it's called gutter. Here it's called water shaft. But what it really was is Hezekiah's spring, and it was renamed that later on. But there was a tunnel dug whereby they could get water and keep themselves from dying of thirst if the city was besieged. And David seems to have known where this water shaft was, and he got men that would climb up inside of it, and they obviously were successful in surprising the Jebusites inside, and they ended up taking the city. And then here, of course, David kind of throws this back at them, saying, "Oh, really? If you had blind and lame people, you think that I'm going to be kept from that?" And again, it's a very challenging portion of Hebrew here that you'll find many different translations for. And we don't have a really good understanding because we don't know what all the slang was back then. We don't know what the taunts were on how they, you know, told people things to try to get them aggravated, to try to belittle them, all those cliches that we know today in our English vernacular also existed in the Hebrew at that time. And so that's what most of the translators and commentaries, at least on the Jewish side, will say this was a taunt, and that David obviously was successful. So David uh, took this and got men to climb up in this gutter. This gutter or this tunnel was discovered in 1867 by a group of archaeologists in Jerusalem. They found it was 230 feet in length. That goes from the spring of Gihon, and the Israelites obviously crawled through that. And you'll see later on when you look at Hezekiah's spring and Hezekiah's tunnel was built around this also. I believe it was made a bit larger. So if we look at verse 9, and it says that David dwelt here, and obviously it takes some time to do that, but there's not a lot of information. We don't get told a lot about how David conquered them and how he set it up as the stronghold and how it became the city of David. But what's interesting here is you'll see another word that appears back one of the first times, and it says, and David built this from around Milo or Milo. It's pronounced Milo. And in your English translations, it would just call it Milo, but in Hebrew, it has a definite article in front of it, so the word the has to be used in. And this was referred to just like they refer to the White House or the Pentagon or the State Department building or the Capitol. This is the Milo, and it was David building this and refortifying it, and it became stronger. And it said in verse 10, that David went on and became great, and Yahweh, uh, their their God, of hosts was with him. And again, I think that's just a beautiful commentary here that it was obvious that God was with him and that God was working in his life and that everyone knew it. And God actually established his kingdom, the kingdom for David. And so, however, David was able to defeat the Jebusites, really, he wanted to give God the glory for it. And that's why you don't see a lot of commentary on it. But verse 10 sums it up so very, very wonderfully. And it's beautiful poetry. And you also see a word here, Lord of hosts. The word is Sevaot. And again, this is sometimes interpreted or translated as God of the armies. And it was again, very challenging to understand God of the armies, but the root word also comes from the word that's actually used for a breast, a woman's breast, and how she nourishes and feeds her young one is a root word for this word, which I find is quite fascinating because it has kind of a dual meaning. Not only is God somewhat fighting for them, but he's also nourishing them and protecting them and causing them to grow. And so that is very, very interesting. And so we're going to kind of leave. Oh, we'll go do one more verse. We'll do verse 11 here. That once David's kingdom became established, here suddenly we see a new visitor coming. It's Hiram, the king of Tyre. And of course, the word in Hebrew is pronounced Sor. Um, so here Hiram, Melech of Sor, and he sent messengers to David and gave him trees and carpenters and mason stones and built a house for David. This seems like kind of a strange verse to just be put in there, but what it does show us is that it's a sign of God touching the lives and the hearts of the people that were around about him and giving him favor. So someone who has the potential to be his enemy is now coming to him saying, well, I'm going to build this for you. I'm going to contribute wood and carpenters and stones and you just sit back and relax and we're going to build you a really nice house. So they were recognizing God's favor. And I guess we see that summed up in verse 12 where it says David knew that the Lord and Yahweh, meaning the compassionate merciful side of God, has established him as king over all Israel and exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people, Israel. And again, a beautiful, beautiful commentary here of David giving all the glory to God, and that it had to be very, very evident to himself and to all the people, and even to his enemies, that God's favor was upon him so much that people were coming to help him who had previously probably wished that they could annihilate him, Israel. Now we're coming to their defense and to help him. So we're going to stop at verse 12. I pray that you are enjoying these little tidbits here and just encourage you to keep studying. And I know that God will richly, richly bless you. God bless you. Bye bye.